Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. First of all, I have to give a huge warning to today's case. Prepare yourselves. Today's case is not a nice one at all. And I first came across today's case when I was actually looking for cases to cover, and I came across a news article with the title, quote, "German incest rape monster fathered 7 children with stepdaughter." And I was like, what? So I dug into this case a little bit more, and this case is centered around a man named Detlev, and he has been named German's Josef Fritzl. So that probably gives you an idea of what today's case is going to be about. Because Detlev ran a campaign of abuse and terror in his own home to his own family in Germany for years. He sexually abused multiple of his children from a very young age. He was also physically abusive to everyone in the house. His daughter then went on to give birth to his children, meaning that those children were also his children and his grandchildren at the same time. It is so incredibly messed up. But not just that, this disgusting monster then also sexually abused his new grandchildren, who were also his children. The perpetrator in today's case, Detlev, is about as bad as you can get. He is the worst of the worst. And it was only in 2010, when Josef Fritzl made headlines everywhere, that today's perpetrator, Detlev, was also exposed. And because they both got exposed and were talked about at the same time, a lot of people were making a lot of comparisons between the two. And yes, there are a lot of similarities between the two. So we have a very disturbing case to talk about today and a lot to get through. So let's jump in. Before we get started, I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is ExpressVPN. And you probably know by now that ExpressVPN is an app that keeps you safe and secure when you're using the internet. I have been using ExpressVPN now for years, and I highly recommend that you check them out because hackers are everywhere on public Wi-Fi, which is why whenever I'm in a coffee shop, restaurant, hotel, just whenever I'm out in public, I always make sure that I am connected to ExpressVPN. I turn on ExpressVPN to secure my connection from any creepy hackers out there that could be looking to steal any of my personal information, my banking details, my passwords. So all of that is a huge benefit, and you should be using ExpressVPN for that alone. However, there is another huge benefit to using ExpressVPN, and that is because ExpressVPN allows you access to hundreds, if not thousands, of TV shows and movies from all over the world. And I love BBC iPlayer. I binge so many shows like Line of Duty, Kin, Time, Happy Valley. And recently I have also just binged the first season of Ludwig, a comedy crime drama starring David Mitchell, whose twin brother is actually a detective in the police, but his brother suddenly goes missing. So David Mitchell then gets dragged into filling in his brother's shoes. He starts pretending to be his twin brother, living this fake life as a detective before solving murder cases all around Cambridge, whilst simultaneously trying to solve the mystery of his missing brother. And the whole show has so many twists and turns. It is absolutely hilarious. It's definitely a show that is fun to watch. But if you don't live in the UK like I do, you don't have access to BBC iPlayer, where you can watch all of these crime dramas that I have been obsessed with for the longest time. And also, BBC iPlayer is free, so you can watch all of these shows for free. But if you live outside of the UK, all you need is ExpressVPN. You just download ExpressVPN, change your location to the UK, connect, and then go on to BBC iPlayer, and you have access to all of these incredible crime dramas for free. And it's not just the UK, ExpressVPN has servers in 105 countries, meaning that you can access TV shows and movies from all of those 105 countries. It works on every device, laptops, phones, TVs. You can use it on up to 8 devices at the same time. So if you are looking for a new show to binge, all you need is ExpressVPN, and you have so much at your fingertips. But also stay safe and secure online by using ExpressVPN. And right now, you can get an extra 4 months of ExpressVPN for free by scanning the QR code that is on your screen right now, or going to the link in my description box, which is expressvpn.com/Danielle. So just go to expressvpn.com/Danielle to get an extra 4 months for free. And using my link really does help out this channel because it lets ExpressVPN know that you came from this video. So thank you again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to all of you watching right now, because truly without all of you guys, I wouldn't get opportunities like this. But just before we get onto today's case, there is one quick announcement that I need to make, because as you guys may be aware, I do have a podcast, The Criminal Makeup. My podcast is available on all podcast platforms where you can binge all of the episodes from this channel. Well, on Spotify from this point going forward, the criminal makeup will also have video available. So if you listen to the show on Spotify, you can now switch the audio to video at any point. So if you're listening to the podcast, but I'm talking about something in particular, or there's like images on the screen or whatever, you can actually now switch to video and see exactly what I'm talking about. And I am so excited for these new video episodes to be going live. And the first video episode went live just last Thursday, meaning that it is available right now. And it features the video that I created on the infamous Shelley Notek, America's Most Evil Mother. And you can check out that video episode of the criminal makeup right now on Spotify. I will leave a link to my podcast in the description down below, so go check it out if you didn't know I had a podcast. And now let's jump into today's case. So the main perpetrator in today's case is a man named Detlev S. And because of Germany's strict privacy laws, we don't know his full last name. We only know him as Detlev S. We also don't have many pictures of him. There's literally only like 2 or 3 pictures of him online, and his face is blurred, even though badly blurred. It's blurred, so I apologize. There's basically no images in this video. And we also don't know too much about Detlev's childhood as well, again, probably because of the privacy laws. All we know is that he was born in 1963, and at some point during his childhood, both of his parents died at the same time. And we don't know the circumstances around his parents' death, but the fact that they both died at the same time, you would probably just assume like an accident or something like that. All we know is that Detlev ended up in the foster care system, and he remained in this system throughout his childhood and into his teenage years. But even though we don't know too many details about that, to lose both of your parents at the same time as a child would be incredibly traumatic. And we also don't know what Detlev's experience was in the foster care system either. But given the rest of today's case, something must have happened. Like some sort of trauma definitely has to be there in his childhood other than just his parents dying. But Detlev was evaluated by a mental health professional, and it was found that he had no mental health issue or personality disorder. However, it was discovered that he constantly displayed antisocial behavior, had tendencies for aggression, and he had a very destructive personality, and all of that will become very, very clear throughout the rest of today's case. So we now jump forward to 1984. Detlev is now 21 years old, and this is when he meets a woman who becomes his girlfriend for the first time, a woman named Erica. Now, Erica herself was 26 years old, so she was 5 years older than Detlev, and she had already been married twice. She married for the first time when she was only 16 years old, and she had 1 child from that marriage. And then she married again 7 years later at the age of 23, and she had 3 children from that marriage. So overall, Erica has 4 children before she meets Detlev. And then after her second divorce, this is when she met Detlev. They quickly fall in love, and literally within no time whatsoever, they get married. And at the time that they got married, 2 of Erica's children from her previous marriage, they were just babies. They were only 6 months old. They were actually twins. And these twins are only known in the media as Bjorn and Natalie. But these twins will be very, very significant for the rest of today's case. So Detlev and Erica are now married. Detlev now buys a home with his wife Erica. So all 4 of the children and Detlev and Erica are now living in this home. They move to a place called Flutation. I really hope that that is how you pronounce it. I tried to look up online how to pronounce it, but this place is so small that I couldn't even find out how to pronounce it online, because this is a tiny, tiny little village in the middle of Germany. The population is only 750. So to say that this is tiny is an understatement. It's the kind of village where everybody knows everybody and everyone knows everyone's business. So the house they bought was a 2-story home, and after the family move into this home, Detlev officially adopts all of Erica's children. So he is now officially these 4 children's father. But then Detlev and Erica start to have children themselves. They eventually have 4 children themselves, 3 boys and 1 girl. So there are currently 8 children in this home. And this apparent loving family home would soon turn into a house of horrors. Because as the whole family are settling into their new family life, their new home, as the children were growing up, Detlev got a job as a truck driver. This was his full-time job, and he absolutely hated his job. Whenever he would return home, he was always in such a foul mood. It was kind of like one of those situations where as soon as he would walk through the door, everyone would scatter because no one wanted to get in his way. And Detlev quickly turned to alcohol. He would drink constantly. It would be a very common thing for there to be at least 12 crates of beer in the home. He was also a very aggressive person as well, which obviously we know from that mental health professional when he was a child. But he would fly into a rage at his wife Erica. He would constantly be arguing with her. He would shout at the children for no reason. He had the sharpest, most vile tongue you can imagine. He was verbally abusing everyone in this house. And that's where it started. It started with verbal abuse. But it wasn't long until that turned into physical abuse. And Detlev was physically abusing every single person in that household. He was a terrible abuser, and I mean truly terrible. He would beat the children black and blue. He would mainly use his fists or his palms, but he would also use weapons, and he would use weapons just around the house. He would use whatever he could get his hands on, such as metal tools, a German army belt, a carpet beater, a leather strap. There were also times when he would throw ashtrays at the children's heads, and these beatings would just come out of nowhere. You never knew what was going to anger Detlev. If the children laughed too loudly, for example, they would get a beating. If they said something out of turn or just something that Detlev didn't like, they would be beaten black and blue. It is said that Detlev would just beat his children whenever he felt like it. He basically just used it as a form of entertainment. Detlev saw the children and his wife as his property, meaning that he could do whatever he wanted to his children and to his wife because it was his right to do so. He never showed any love, affection, or fatherly tenderness to any of the children. He was just absolutely vile. And something else that is just absolutely despicable is that he would always make sure to beat up his adopted children more than his biological children. And if the children ever complained, if they screamed out in pain during the beating, Detlev would grab them, throw them into the car, drive them out into like a woodland area in the middle of nowhere, and he would beat them up to a bloody pulp. He basically punished the children for crying out in pain, for showing fear. He wanted to turn his children into emotionless robots, just for them to be there for him to do whatever he wanted to them. And when he would drive them out to the woods to beat them up, he made his own homemade weapons to do this. He had a wooden handle that attached to this were leather strips. And as soon as he got the children out into the woodland area, he would make the children strip out of all of their clothes, and he would whip them over the back over and over again until they were bleeding. The children would be covered in cuts and bruises, sometimes up to 20 centimeters long. They were pretty much bleeding from head to toe. Their face was so swollen, sometimes their eyes were completely swollen shut. And Detlev would just say to the children that he was beating up in the middle of the woods, "You can scream all you want here because no one's going to hear you." Detlev would also say that if the children continued to complain about being beaten up, Detlev would drive them to the nearest foster home and drop them there and leave them. And I don't know if this mirrors his own experience in the foster care system. I just don't know. But the children would also have strangulation marks on their necks. So it was also clear that Detlev was also strangling the children as a form of punishment and to install fear. And when Detlev would return from the woods with whatever child he had currently beaten up, if the mom Erica ever intervened, if she ever said a single word about the fact that he had just beaten up one of their children, Detlev would severely beat his wife. And he would beat his wife so severely, it was quite often that she would pass out from the pain. There were a number of occasions where Detlev beat her up so badly, he actually nearly killed her. It was like something just took over him. It literally was like a switch was flipped. Because when he would beat up Erica, he was like a madman. He was a man possessed, and he would just continue to punch her, kick her in the head, in the stomach, use weapons, and he literally wouldn't stop until she wasn't moving on the floor. And Detlev did this repeatedly until he had full control over his wife. And so he knew that she was not going to stop him abusing the children. And because now the mom, Erica, wasn't helping the children, she wasn't trying to intervene, this is when the abuse only got worse. Because now there were times when all 4 of Detlef's adopted children would be lined up in the living room against the wall. They were all completely naked. He would put them on their knees and he would just beat them up one after another. And he would make them all watch as if it's like some sort of sport. But it was also an intimidation tactic as well, because he would beat up one child and the other children knew what was coming for them. And the mother, Erica, was actually in the same room when this was happening, and she never intervened. She just sat there in the armchair, and it said that she was just in a daze, completely drunk on alcohol. This is also the point where neighbors actually started to notice that something wasn't right in the house. They had noticed that Detlev was drinking very heavily and that he had become violent towards his family. But again, if the neighbors ever intervened, if they ever said anything, Detlev also threatened to beat up the neighbors. It's absolutely crazy. He is just threatening people left, right, and center, and everyone is so scared of him. He's able to get away with all of this. Teachers also saw the cuts and bruises on the children. And if I'm going to be completely honest, I'm surprised that the children are even allowed to go to school. But whenever they would bring up these injuries to Detlev would just say that the children inflicted these injuries themselves. His children, they were very brutal, they were very dangerous children, and the teachers should be afraid of them, that it was all the children's fault, and the teachers just accepted this. And in order to keep his violent grip on this household, Detlev enforced a load of rules. The first rule is that the children were never allowed to participate in any kind of sport or physical activity with friends or at school, because then everyone would see the bruises and the cuts on their backs from being whipped in the woods. Any friends, neighbors, extended family were now banned from entering the house, because under no circumstances could they accidentally find out what was going on in that house. No secrets could be revealed. Detlev also removed all of the doors from inside of the house. So there was just doorways. There was no actual door in there. And this is because he wanted to be able to see what was going on in his house at all times. It is also said that he ran a regimen of, quote, compulsively controlled isolation, where he basically just kept his family completely isolated from the outside world. Apart from the fact that the children left to go to school, other than that, nobody was allowed to leave the house. He also used the very common tactic of abusers, and that is that he would turn the children against one another. He would rarely allow the children to talk openly to one another. He always tried to create division in the household to make sure that they couldn't all band together and go against him, because quite frankly, there's 9 versus 1. But they were also scared. They basically didn't talk to one another. And this level of control went on for years and years. Detlev had complete control over his entire family, and nobody could do anything about it. And then at some point, just when you think things can't get any worse, they do. Because Detlev was very physically controlling and abusive to his whole family. But then he loses his driving license because of drunk driving, so then he ultimately loses his job. And Detlev used this as an excuse to be even worse, to abuse his family even more. He takes all of his anger out on his family for the mistakes that he made. I mean, ultimately, it was him that decided to drink drive, which is incredibly dangerous. But of course, it wasn't his fault. No. It was his family. It was his children. It was his wife for stressing him out, for making him turn to alcohol. And he had so much rage inside of him that Detlev decides to take his abuse one step further. And this is when he starts to sexually abuse the children as well. Now, the abuse started with his 2 adopted children, the twins that I mentioned earlier, Bjorn and Natalie. Remember I said that they would become very important in today's case? Well, at this point, the twins were now 4 years old, and Detlev started to do the most awful and disgusting things to these young children. And I need to warn you now, pretty much the rest of this video, but especially this next part, is going to be very difficult to listen to. Because apparently it is said that Detlev at this point had lost sexual interest in his wife. And he became, quote, more sexually interested in his children instead, which is an absolutely disgusting way of saying it. And I'm just like, oh my God, the audacity of this man. He's so disgusting. I don't bloody care if you have lost sexual interest in your wife. That doesn't give you an excuse to sexually abuse children. So from this point, every single night going forward, late on the evening, Detlev would now enter the bedroom of the 4-year-old twins. He would climb into bed with them. And it is said he would, quote, caress them between their bare legs before sexually assaulting them. He would say things like, "It doesn't hurt. You'll see. It'll feel great." There were also times where Detlev would sit the twins, both of them, next to him on the bed, and he would sexually abuse them at the same time. And we have no idea if the mom, Erica, knew about this sexual abuse. It is said that Detlev would abuse the children most of the time when she wasn't in the house. But it wasn't just the 2 twins that he was sexually abusing. Detlev also started to abuse his 2 older adopted children as well. So he is sexually abusing all 4 of his adopted children. And most of the time, this sexual abuse would occur when Detlev was taking them to bed on the evening. He would climb into bed next to these children and he would do the most awful things. And no one seemed to intervene. And Detlev got away with this for years. Now, at some point, the sexual abuse did die down. I don't know if it went away completely, but it did seem to go away somewhat for some of the children. And we don't know why this was the case. But now we get to 1995. Detlev is currently 32 years old. And very sadly, this is when the sexual abuse comes back with a vengeance. Because in May of that year, it was the 12th birthday of the twins. So the sexual abuse of the twins started when they were 4, which was 8 years ago. And yes, the sexual abuse died down, but the sexual abuse was possibly going on and off for those 8 years. So the twin girl, Natalie, she was having a birthday party. I'm actually surprised that they were allowed a birthday party. But this is when Detlev dragged Natalie into her bedroom where he, quote, began to penetrate her with his fingers. Now, Natalie, she screamed out in pain, but Detlev forced her back onto the bed. And he said that as her father, it was his right to do this. And Natalie pleaded with him to stop, but he wouldn't. And now Detlev would sexually abuse Natalie on a daily basis. But it wasn't just Natalie that he was abusing again on a regular basis. It was also her twin brother, Bjorn. Detlev would make Bjorn get into the shower with him, where he would make Bjorn masturbate in front of him until he ejaculated. And again, I just want to remind you all that Bjorn is only 12 years old. He was incredibly confused by this whole thing, but he was just following the instructions from his adopted father. And Detlev would say things like, "Doesn't that feel so good? You don't need to be embarrassed in front of me. I'm your father. This is completely normal." So the whole shower situation, it started with just Bjorn. But then the other sons would be brought into the whole shower thing and they would be made to do the same thing. He would also caress the boys when they were in the shower under the pretenses of bathing them. And he would say things like, "Look, see how great this is." The sexual abuse of Natalie also continued to get worse. Detlev was now raping Natalie via sexual intercourse. It is said that he would do this whenever his wife was out of the house shopping. He would also force the other children to go outside and play so he could have the whole house and Natalie to himself. But there was even one time where he was sexually abusing Natalie and everyone was at home. Everyone was inside of the house and everyone heard Natalie screaming out in pain. The mom, Erica, and the rest of the children, they rushed upstairs to see what was going on. But Detlev came out of a room with Natalie and Natalie was bleeding from her genital area. The mom, Erica, started screaming, "Keep your hands off of my daughter." So this would suggest that this is the first time she's become aware of the sexual abuse of her children. But again, we just don't know. But in Detlev's mind, he thought, how dare my wife tell me what to do with my own children? So he beat Erica up black and blue until she was unconscious in front of all of the children. And this is actually when the police were finally called for the first time. It looked like something was about to be done. finally, and that should be the end of this video. But as soon as the police arrived, Erica retracted her statement. Detlev had clearly threatened her in some sort of way. He clearly threatened the children and no one said a word. And very sadly, no one in the family ever tried to intervene or contact the police ever again from this point going forward. And this case has been a lot so far, but unfortunately it only continues to get worse. Because as we know, Detlev at this point is out of a job, so he has no way of earning money. And this is when he comes up with one of the most horrific ideas that you've ever heard, because he decides that he wants to sell his children to be abused. You heard that right. And apparently Detlev had already been doing this with his wife. He had forced his wife into sex work, selling her and collecting the money for himself. And his wife Erica didn't want to be doing this, but if she didn't do as she was told, she was beaten. But now Detlev wanted to sell his children as well. So in June of 1995, Natalie, his adopted daughter, she's still only 12 years old. This is when Detlev did the unthinkable for the very first time, because he took Natalie to the house of two of his friends, and his friends are complete pedophiles and monsters as well. Now, we only know these two friends as Ali and Mustafa. We don't know their last names or anything like that because of Germany's privacy laws. But these two men, they were a lot older than Detlev. They were in their 50s, and Detlev just took Natalie to these two men to be abused. So the two men, they started to make Natalie drink alcohol. They got her really drunk on schnapps. They then made her watch a porn film with them, and then they began to horrifically sexually abuse Natalie. And Detlev was there the whole time, just watching everything unfold. He was instructing Natalie on how to undress and how she should be, and he actually said to Natalie, "Please smile a little, like pretend to enjoy yourself." It is so sick. Detlev then said to his two friends, quote, "You can do whatever you want to her." Now, Natalie tried to resist. She was definitely screaming. She was putting up a fight. But then the one man, Ali, he put his whole weight on this 12-year-old girl so she couldn't move. And then he raped Natalie. Now, whilst this rape was going on, Mustafa, the other man, and then Detlev were still in the room, and they were watching the whole thing masturbating. Yeah, the two of them were getting off on watching a 12-year-old girl be raped. Now, after all of this sexual abuse of Natalie took place, Detlev collected the money. He collected 40 Deutschmarks, and then this became his new way of making money. He sold his adopted daughter to be abused, and Natalie would have to go through this at least twice a month. Detlev was collecting money each time she was abused. He then also started taking photographs of the abuse, and he started to build up quite a collection. And I can guarantee you, he was probably selling those as well. On one horrific occasion, Natalie was raped by 4 different men at the same time. And again, I want to remind you that she's only 12. I'm honestly just lost for words. But it doesn't stop there. This case is just truly too much. Because at this point, Detlev, he was in his late 30s. And he was about to do something that he had never done before. And that is that he started to sexually abuse his biological daughter. So if you remember, because it is quite confusing because there's so many children involved in today's case, but there are 8 children altogether, but only 2 of them are daughters. One of them is the adopted daughter, Natalie, and then Detlev also has a biological daughter called Jasmine. All of the other 6 children, adopted and biological, are all boys. And as far as I can tell, the sexual abuse of the boys had stopped at this point. Detlev only seemed to be sexually interested in Natalie, and this is when he now turned his sexual interest to his own biological daughter. Because shortly after Jasmine's 9th birthday, this is when Detlev dragged Jasmine into the backseat of his car, drove her out to a remote woodland area, and began to brutally rape her. Jasmine resisted. She screamed out in pain. She begged her dad to leave her alone, but he would not listen. He showed no mercy. And from this point going forward, Detlev would sexually abuse his biological daughter, Jasmine, at least once a week. And this went on for years. It is also said that when the girls were on their period, he would make them perform oral sex on him instead. He would also manipulate Jasmine into performing sex acts on him, and he blackmailed her. He would say, oh, you're not allowed to do this around the house, or you're not allowed to do that around the house unless you do this for me. He basically gave her privileges around the house if she performed sex acts on him. It's all just twisted mind games. But not only that, just like what he was doing with his adopted daughter Natalie, Detlev also started to sell his biological daughter Jasmine to be sexually abused by others. Jasmine was now also taken to those two friends, Ali and Mustafa, and those two men would now sexually abuse Natalie and Jasmine at the same time, and Detlev would now charge them more for the privilege of abusing two girls at the same time. I'm so lost for words with this case. It's just truly disgusting. Detlev and those two men, they're just absolute monsters. And it does leave the question of how is he getting away with this? I mean, obviously, first of all, we have to talk about the mom, Erica. She is being badly abused herself. She is now aware of everything that is happening. And it's like, yes, I know that she's being abused herself, but why is she not contacting the authorities? Why is she not trying to protect her children at all? Because she is literally doing nothing. Because at this point, Erica had taken to sleeping downstairs. She did not want to be around Detlev at all. And Erica would watch her husband take their two daughters, Natalie and Jasmine, up to the bedroom on multiple occasions, and she knew what was happening. And it is really, really difficult because she's obviously a victim of Detlev herself. But it's like, these are your children. You need to be protecting your children. You need to put them before yourself in this situation. Later down the line, Jasmine actually wrote a letter to her mom, where in the letter she said, Mom, one question. Why did you do this to yourself and your children? How did you not realize what was going on? Jasmine also, in that letter that she would write later on down the line, said that when she was 9 years old, when her dad first sexually abused her, that is the moment when he stopped being her dad. She also wrote, quote, nobody helped me. It hurts so much to have grown up like that. And I think that that is what is probably one of the most devastating things about this case, is that these children truly felt alone. They didn't even feel like their mom was there protecting them. Like, nobody was there for these children. At some point as well, all of the other children in the house became aware of the sexual abuse of Natalie and Jasmine. They became aware that every so often the two girls would be put in the car, they would be driven out to the middle of nowhere, and that they would be sexually abused. And whenever the children would say, where are you going? Detlev would always come up with an excuse, a reason as to why they were leaving the house. He would always say, oh, we're just going to the shop, we're just going to get gas, or there's just a medical appointment we need to go to. But then when they would return home, the tires would be covered in mud. It was very clear that he had literally been driving in a woodland area, and it became very clear to all of the children that their father was just lying to them and was covering up this big secret that was going on, that he was sexually abusing his daughters. Now, at this point, you would think maybe the children would turn on their mom, Erica, because like I said, she never intervened. She never protected the children. You would think that the children would have some sort of anger or resentment towards their mom, but that is actually not what happened. The kids saw their mom as a victim as well, which she is. The children still loved their mother deeply, and apparently Erica would care for the children in whatever way she could. So even Jasmine, who is currently being abused by her biological father, Detlev, would say things like, Mom, I love you more than anything. I don't want to destroy the family. And I think that's so sad as well. So many children feel so responsible for keeping their family together, and that is not right. And that's exactly what is happening in this situation. Jasmine especially is feeling the pressure. She doesn't want to rock the boat. She doesn't want to complain about her dad's abuse. She doesn't want to go to the authorities because she doesn't want to tear her family apart. And that breaks my heart. No child should ever have to feel that pressure. So Jasmine, and I assume Natalie as well, probably all of the children, they are left in this very confusing state where they probably do feel some anger towards their mom, some resentment, but then they also feel guilty for feeling like that, and they also feel sorry for her because she's a victim. But this is also the same time when the extended family started to become suspicious about what was going on in the house. Because in 1998, a few years after Detlev had started selling his children to be sexually abused, an uncle of the family, and I don't know if this is Erica's brother or Detlev's brother, teacher. I just know he's an uncle. He filed a criminal complaint with the police about his suspicions about what Detlev was doing. And an investigation was opened. Welfare officers actually visited the home. They were particularly interested in the welfare of the twins, Natalie and Bjorn. And this was because at this time, Bjorn was really acting out in school. He was definitely showing some behavioral issues. Teachers were starting to become worried and suspicious that something wasn't right in the home. He set fire to an anthill in school as well, which landed him in trouble with the police. Bjorn had also expressed thoughts about suicide as well, so the teacher actually called Erica and Detlev into the school to talk about their son's problems. And at that meeting, Detlev became so enraged, he actually turned the tables onto the teacher. He actually started accusing the teacher of being inappropriate with his son, and she was taking far too much interest in his son, that she was actually the creepy one. He actually said maybe she had a thing for him. And I'm like, wow, he is so confident. The fact that he is actually abusing his children, especially his two daughters, and then he has the audacity to turn around to somebody else and actually accuse them of doing the same thing. I just can't with this man. So then Detlev actually writes to the welfare officer himself and demands that that teacher stay away from his children because it was that teacher that was being inappropriate. He even files a restraining order against that teacher. It's just utter madness. But obviously this investigation has been opened by the police. So when Bjorn is taken in for questioning by the police, he is asked, is everything okay at home? Is everything okay with your dad? Bjorn said that his dad was amazing, fantastic. Detlev was a perfect father, and that he had no idea what the police were talking about all of these suspicions and accusations of abuse. It is very clear that Detlev had gotten to Bjorn and threatened him to keep quiet about everything before he went to the police. So because of Bjorn's statements to the police closed their investigation. Detlev has now gotten away with all of the abuse that he has been carrying out, and it now gets worse. Because what happens next, and this has to be probably the most shocking thing from this whole case, which is unbelievable of me to say considering what we have already covered, because it is now the year 2000, and after carrying out the sexual abuse of his adopted daughter Natalie and his biological daughter Jasmine for years, this is when 37-year-old Detlev decided that he wanted more children. But did he want children with his wife Erica, who was currently 42 years old? Oh, no. He wanted children with his daughter. I cannot believe I've just said that. Up until this moment, Detlev had always used protection. He had always used condoms, and he had placed the two girls on birth control. But now he decided that he actually wanted to have children with his adopted daughter, Natalie, who was currently only 16 years old. And Detlev had been sexually abusing Natalie since she was 4 years old on and off, and then the extreme sexual abuse and rape started when she was 12. So she's been through all of that, and now he decides that he wants to impregnate her. So that's what he does. He takes her off birth control, he stops using any kind of protection, he raped her repeatedly, and it wasn't long until Natalie fell pregnant. Now, a lot of articles online have called this incest. Now, whether it actually is incest kind of seems to be up for debate because Natalie is his adopted daughter, not his biological daughter. But either way, why does it have to be a debate? He adopted her. She is his daughter, not by blood, but she is his daughter. He has been raping her since she was 12 years old, and he has intentionally impregnated her. It doesn't matter if it's incest or not. So Natalie is now carrying Detlev's child, and Detlev made sure to keep this a secret between him and Natalie. He didn't want anyone finding out, even though for everyone that lives in that house, I think it's pretty clear what is going on, but he's still trying to keep it a secret. He forces Natalie to tell everyone, the rest of the family, just anyone that she comes across, that she fell pregnant by having sex with a stranger. So Detlev starts to accompany Natalie to all of her hospital appointments and all of her appointments with her midwife. And whenever she had to fill in forms or whatever, or whenever she was asked, she would always say that the father was unknown. And Detlev was just at all of these appointments pretending to be a very caring father / grandfather to the unborn child, when actually he's going to be both the father and the grandfather to that unborn baby. It is just so messed up. And Detlev always made sure that Natalie's interactions with any medical professionals were always limited. He didn't want anyone asking too many questions, becoming suspicious. He also forced Natalie to decline any care after the baby was born because, again, he just didn't want medical professionals around to become suspicious. And later that year, Natalie gave birth to Detlev's child and grandchild. And no one else apparently in the family had any idea. But like I've said, the people that live in the same house, I guarantee you they knew. But do things stop there? No, they don't, unfortunately, because Natalie didn't only have one child with Detlev. Because just a few months after giving birth, Natalie was pregnant again, after being raped multiple times again by Detlev. And once again, Natalie was forced to lie about who the father was, even though it's Detlev. She had to say that she had fallen pregnant by a different stranger this time. She ended back at the same hospital from the previous pregnancy. She actually had the same midwife. Detlev turned up at all of the appointments again. People definitely started to become suspicious, but no one said anything for this second pregnancy, and Natalie gave birth to a second baby. And then less than a year after the second baby was born, guess what? She was pregnant again by being raped by her adopted father, Detlev. Detlev was forcing Natalie to become pregnant almost immediately after giving birth. He probably was raping her the moment she got home from the hospital. And Natalie had to make up one lie after another to explain why she kept getting pregnant. She just accidentally fell pregnant by a different stranger. And every single time she went to the hospital, it was always father unknown. Detlev was always there at every appointment. He was just acting very creepy all of the time. And eventually, when Natalie was pregnant with the fourth child, the midwife was really suspicious now, and she actually did report her suspicions. She thought something was seriously wrong here. I can't imagine she thought Detlev was the father, because who would actually think that? But she definitely thought something fishy was going on. So a welfare officer was notified, but the welfare officer didn't find anything suspicious, so the case investigation was closed. Natalie also just seemed completely resigned to her situation, which just breaks my heart. It's like she just thought she had no choice. So every single appointment she went to, it was like she wanted to just get the appointment over as soon as possible. She was just emotionless. She never had any questions. She never really spoke. And also, what I find just really, really heartbreaking is that during the births, Natalie also remained pretty much silent. She just had no emotion when she's giving birth. Midwives and doctors have said that it was kind of just like she was empty, like there was just nothing there. And I'm not surprised given everything that she has gone through. And it's just the same cycle that keeps repeating itself every single year. Natalie really is getting pregnant and giving birth every single year. So we've obviously only spoken about 4 pregnancies and 4 babies that she's had with Detlev, but then it was 5 pregnancies. And at one point, Natalie gave birth to a little boy called Kevin, who died of sudden infant death syndrome at just 3 months old. And Detlev just buried him in a neighbouring village. And I just can't even imagine how Natalie would have been feeling about all of that. Now, in the middle of all of these babies being born, so there's currently 5 that have been born right now, Natalie's twin brother Bjorn had had enough. And he tried desperately to bring the whole thing crashing down. Because on no particular day in 2002, Natalie had recently just given birth to one of the children. This is when Bjorn heard screams coming from an upstairs bedroom, so he rushed upstairs to see what was going on. And his younger sister, Jasmine, who is the biological daughter of Detlev, was bleeding from her genital area. Now, Bjorn, he was currently 18 years old. He couldn't take this anymore. He had seen his adopted father abuse all of these children for years now. He himself had been abused both physically and sexually by him. So he turned to his dad and he started screaming, "How dare you abuse my little sister?" He then started saying, "I know you are the father of my twin sister's children. He started calling Detlev an evil monster. Bjorn wasn't stupid. He was aware of everything that was going on. Even though Detlev had tried his hardest to keep everything a secret, he clearly hadn't tried that hard. And Detlev responded by flying into a fit of rage. He started saying that Jasmine was bleeding from her genitals and it was a normal thing that happened in puberty. He denied everything. He said that he wasn't the father of Natalie's children. I assume that Detlev started to beat up Bjorn for even having the audacity to go up against him. The mom, Erica, actually did try and intervene at this point, to which Detlev started beating her to a pulp. He beat her until she was unconscious. All of the other children in the house were screaming, crying, everyone was scared. One of them actually did phone the police. Bjorn and one of his brothers, Sven, was taken down to the police station. The police asked the two brothers what was going on, and Bjorn and Sven, they confessed to everything. They tell the police everything about what Detlev has been doing to this whole family for years. They talk about the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, and about their suspicions about Detlev fathering Natalie's children, his adopted daughter's children. So the police were like, oh, okay, this seems to be a case for the child welfare officers. Let's just brush this off our table, off our desk. We don't want to deal with something this messy. Oh, no, let's brush it off to somebody else. So they sent the two boys back home because it really did seem like the police didn't care. A few days pass and child welfare officers finally arrive at the house, which is crazy. You would think after accusations about what has been going on in today's case, you would think that child welfare officers would be there within the hour or as quickly as they can. But yeah, a few days pass, child welfare officers finally arrive at the house. But guess what? As soon as they question all of the children, as soon as they question the mom, Erica, they all deny knowledge of anything. Shocker. Who would have thought Detlev the abuser has threatened his whole family once again to keep quiet? So the welfare officer first speaks to Natalie about the accusations that Detlev is actually the father of her children. And she says, no, he's not. They then speak to Erica, the mom. She denies everything that is going on. They speak to all of the other children. Again, all of the other children deny everything. They say how wonderful Detlev is, etc. And finally, the two boys that actually initially reported Detlev to the police, so Bjorn and Sven, they also retract their statements. They said that they just weren't thinking straight when they made those statements. And the welfare officer just went, okay then. That's great. Seems to be nothing going on here. I'm just going to go. And the case was closed. And I really just want to pull my hair out. It's like, is it not obvious what has happened here? Detlev has clearly just threatened everyone. And at this point in the case, we are in 2002. We are not talking about a case that happened in the 40s, 50s or 60s where people didn't like to talk about these things and it was all hush hush. And there wasn't as much knowledge about these kinds of things and abusers and narcissists and stuff like that. It's 2002. There is no excuse. I know 2002 was still quite a while ago, but it's still 2002. So things go back to the way they were. However, Bjorn actually does manage to escape the house. He runs away at the age of 18, clearly for his own safety. Now, Detlev actually does manage to track him down and stalk him, and he threatens him to keep his mouth shut, to not report any of the abuse. He tells Bjorn that if he ever goes to the police, he will pay. And Bjorn, I think, takes these threats seriously, but he stays away from the house. He actually never returns to that house, and Bjorn actually does escape for good. The other brother, Sven, also attempts to move out, but Detlev responds by smashing all of Sven's belongings, and he tells Sven that he's not allowed to leave the house. Another brother, Marcus, also tries to move out, but Detlev just beats him up really badly one time when he is drunk, and I don't think he manages to move out either. So the only person that has escaped this house is Bjorn. Now, whilst all of this is going on, Natalie is still giving birth to Detlef's children. So we already know about 5 children. She has been pregnant 5 times, which is crazy in itself. But then she gets pregnant for the 6th time, then the 7th time, and then the 8th time. I'm just truly lost for words. From the year 2000 to 2009, Natalie had 8 of Detlef's children. So she was from the ages of 16 to 24, and she gave birth to 8 children. She literally is getting pregnant and giving birth every single year. And we know that one of the children, Kevin, he did pass away. So she has now got 7 children by Detlev, her adopted father. And after all of these children have been born, Detlev and his wife Erica are obviously still living in the house. They have 7 of their own children still living in the house. And now Detlev's 7 new children have been added to the house. So there is 14 children. I mean, obviously some of them are adults now, but we're still going to say children. 14 children in the house and then the 2 adults. And it is said that the conditions were absolutely terrible. I mean, this house was not big enough for this many people. A lot of the children didn't even have their own beds. It is said that Natalie slept on a sofa in the hallway. And apparently they were getting child benefits for all of the children, but Detlev was just keeping all of this money to himself. And Detlev was still abusing all of the family members. He was still physically abusing pretty much everybody. He was also sexually abusing certain family members. And I should point out that Detlev, whenever he sexually abused his biological daughter Jasmine, he always used protection, because having children with his biological daughter was a step too far for him. And something that I'm really surprised about is that Natalie's now 7 children, they all attended school, which again, I'm finding this so bizarre because normally the children are pulled out of school so no questions are asked. And as the children grew up, as they started to integrate more into the neighborhood and society, neighbours became very suspicious. And why did they become suspicious? Well, that is because all 7 of these new children looked like Detlev, which should not have been the case because yes, he's technically the grandfather of these 7 children. However, Natalie is his adopted daughter. So these 7 children should bear no resemblance to Detlev. But they did. So whispers started to go around this small village that Detlev was actually the father of these 7 children. And it turned into this whole incest drama / gossip. Everyone started talking about the fact that Detlev had impregnated his adopted daughter Natalie. People were becoming very wary of the family, so everyone is gossiping in the village and everything. Everyone clearly knows what's going on, but still, nothing gets done. But on top of this, even when the authorities did come out, Detlev always managed to get out of it. I mean, everyone in that house is obviously too scared to say anything about anything because of the abuser Detlev and his threats. So everyone would just lie to the authorities whenever reports were made about the family. So because all of the children, everyone in that house always said that everything was okay, the authorities believed them and nothing was ever done. And we know that Detlev sells his 2 daughters to be sexually abused. Well, now that actually happens again. He sells his biological daughter Jasmine to be abused once again. Now she's currently 17 years old and he sells her to a different creep, not the 2 creeps from earlier. This creep was a 63-year-old man called Sevket. He was a kebab shop owner. He was probably one of Detlev's creepy friends. I don't know how he makes all of these acquaintances because they live in a tiny village. It's like, how many creeps are in this village? I don't even know if they're from the same village. I don't even know where they're from. But I don't know how he manages to keep finding all of these creeps. But he sells his daughter and he sells her for 40 euros a time. But he gets worse. Of course he does. It always gets worse. Because now Detlev starts to abuse one of his children / grandchildren that he had with Natalie. Now, this little girl, we only know her as Karen. Again, that is not her real name. She is only 7 years old at this point. And this is when Detlev, who is her biological dad, started taking Karen out in his car into the middle of the woods and he sexually assaulted her. And whenever he would bring her back, Karen would go running into the house. She would run up to her bedroom. She would be screaming. She would be crying. She was so disturbed about what was taking place. She didn't understand what was going on. She was terrified. Now, Natalie, her mom, was very suspicious because obviously Detlev used to do this exact same thing to her. So on one occasion, Natalie did take Karen, the 7-year-old, to the hospital. And this is when it was discovered that there were injuries to her genital area. But was anything done about this? No. And I am like, what? Are you being serious right now? A 7-year-old child is at the hospital. It has been discovered that they have injuries to their genital area and nothing gets done. And it's not like people didn't have their suspicions. Karen actually had a childminder who they themselves became suspicious of what Detlev was doing. Neighbours were suspicious. Extended family members were suspicious. Detlev was actually reported once again. An investigation again was opened. At this point, authorities were actually visiting this house once a week. That is how many reports were coming in. That is how many people were suspicious. That is how many investigations were opened. And it is now 2008. Detlev is currently 45 years old. And again, I'm like, it's 2008. Why wasn't more done? Detlev had been abusing his family in some sort of way for over 20 years. The signs of abuse were everywhere. But even though welfare officers, possibly police, were visiting this house once a week, nothing was done to save them. Nothing was ever done. Welfare officers just kept reporting that there was no signs of abuse, that everything seemed perfectly normal. And even though we don't have many images of this case, I can guarantee you that house, what it looked like on the inside, was not normal. And to get around the accusations that Detlev was the father of Natalie's children, Detlev paid one of his dodgy friends to come forward and say that he was the father of all of the children. This stranger claimed paternity rights over the children, and the authorities believed them without any kind of paternity test. And things go on like this now for a couple more years. Nothing changes. Detlev is still physically and sexually abusing various family members. And we are now in 2010. And this all started in the 80s. It's absolutely insane to me how long he was getting away with everything. But finally, and I really do mean finally, things are about to come crashing down around Detlev. And this is all thanks to one person in particular, and that is his biological daughter, Jasmine. Because Jasmine, as we know, has had an absolutely terrible time. She has been physically and sexually abused at the hands of her dad. She has also been sold by her dad to other people. Her father started sexually abusing her from when she was 9 years old. And in 2009, not long after she was sold to that creepy kebab shop owner, Sevket, Jasmine was involved in a pretty serious car accident. It was very severe. Jasmine was left with multiple broken bones, multiple internal injuries and bleeding. She was also left with a broken spine, and her spleen was removed. And I just feel so sorry for Jasmine. Like, that is a very, very serious car accident. And it's like, after everything she has gone through, she's now in this serious car accident that will leave her with life-changing injuries. And the car accident also left Jasmine with a broken pelvis. And because of this broken pelvis, this meant that Detlev was no longer able to sexually assault Jasmine. And he was distraught about this. He didn't care one single bit that his daughter was in this serious car accident. No. The only thing that he cared about is that he could no longer sexually abuse her, and he couldn't sell her to others for them to abuse her. Detlev actually harassed his own daughter about when he could take her around to see his friends again. In fact, after the car accident, before her injuries had even healed, this is when Jasmine was contacted by that creepy man, the kebab shop owner, Sevket, and he asked her when were they going to do something again? Like they were on a date or something. It just makes my skin crawl. It makes my blood boil. Like, what is wrong with these people? And Jasmine had had enough. On top of all of the trauma, everything that she had been through, now this accident and the life-changing injuries. A year later, in 2010, this is when Jasmine is now 18 years old. She decided that she couldn't take things any longer. She wanted to run away from the home, and she also considered taking her own life. And she started this process by writing a bunch of letters to her family, telling them about how she feels, just getting everything out on paper. She wrote about the fact that she couldn't take things any longer. She wanted to get out of this situation, but she was just struggling to get her thoughts out on paper and express exactly how she felt. So she would start one letter and then scrap it, and then she would start another one and scrap that one. So she just had all of these part-written letters. And some of these letters later on, after this case obviously all came out, have been published. In one letter, Jasmine wrote, "So, my dear dad, if anyone could ever call you that, I'm going to leave now. You're a sick, pedophile piece of shit. Mom, one question. Why did you do this to yourself and your children? As if you didn't realize what was going on. Why did I never want to sleep upstairs with him? How often did I cry because I didn't want to? He destroyed me. The sick man took the money, and those men were allowed to F me. I hate him so much. You don't know what that's like. It hurts so much to have grown up like that. Nobody helped me. God, my life is screwed. I don't want to ruin the family, but I can't live with this anymore. I'll never report you, but think about it, Mom. I just have to make something of my screwed up life. I can't take it anymore. When I was 9, Dad stopped being a dad. I'm leaving because he's not a dad. Natalie, take your daughters and go. I want them to stay children. So Jasmine wrote these series of letters, but she never actually got the courage to give them to any of her family members. So she just kept writing these letters, discarding them and writing another one. But a few months later, in August of 2010, Natalie actually discovered these letters, and these letters seem to absolutely break Natalie. I mean, obviously Natalie herself has been through the worst ordeal, but Natalie, when she discovered these letters, seeing everything written down and reading it, everything just hit her. Everything that Detlev had done to her, everything that Detlev had done to all of her siblings, the fact that Detlev had raped her so many times and fathered 8 of her children. But the thing that broke Natalie is the fact that Jasmine, in these letters, expressed that she wanted to take her own life. And even after everything that everyone had gone through, Natalie decided that she couldn't let Jasmine do that. She at least needed to try and help her sister. She had to finally break the silence. So this is when Natalie decided to do something drastic, and she sent those letters to the authorities. And up until this point, the authorities had been useless. Like, they literally have done nothing to help these children and everyone in this family. But after they received those letters, seeing the confessions actually written down with pen and paper, they finally decided to do something. Thank God. So on the 10th of August 2010, the police arrive at Detlef's home, and they finally arrested this monster. And things move very quickly from here. So of course an investigation was opened, but Detlev denies all of the allegations. However, a paternity test was done to see if Detlev was actually the father of Natalie's children. And of course he was. The paternity test confirmed this. And this is when the story broke in the media, that this 48-year-old man had fathered 8 children with his adopted daughter. And he pretty much kept all of his children/grandchildren trapped in this house, abused them for decades. And this is when a lot of the comparisons were made to Joseph Fritzl. The media actually started calling Detlev the German Joseph Fritzl. So following the investigation, Detlev was held in custody awaiting trial. And of course he pled not guilty to everything, so they did have to be a trial. He couldn't have just saved his whole family the ordeal of a trial, could he, and have pleaded guilty? No. He wanted the spotlight. He wanted his time to shine. So in February of 2011, the trial finally happened. And at the trial, Detlev was facing over 350 counts of assault, spanning over 20 years. And this was covering multiple children. It obviously included all of the abuse towards his biological daughter, Jasmine, towards his adopted children, the twins, Bjorn and Natalie, but all of the other children in the house as well that he either physically or sexually abused. It is said that he abused each child hundreds of times. And at this point, Detlef's family hadn't seen him in over 6 months whilst he had been held in custody awaiting trial. And because it was now the trial, they were absolutely terrified to face him again. They didn't ever want to see him. But because he insisted on pleading not guilty, they had to go to trial. But they were all incredibly brave about this. They wanted justice to be served. They wanted him to be punished for what he has done to them. So they faced him one by one. Natalie took the stand first, and she detailed all of the abuse that she had suffered from the age of just 4 years old and onwards. She talked about being sold to these strange men and how Detlev had become the father of her 8 children. Bjorn then took the stand, and he talked about all of the physical abuse that he went through, but also the sexual abuse that he also experienced as a child. He spoke about all of the sexual abuse all of the boys faced in the shower. Many of the other children also took the stand to talk about the abuse that they faced and also witnessed. And the evidence against Detlev was just piling up. Now, the mom, Erica, actually wasn't at the trial. She was still too scared to face her husband, and she just didn't have the strength to turn up and take the stand. And then finally, Detlef's biological daughter, Jasmine, took the stand. And she gave an incredibly emotional testimony. She cried on multiple occasions. Apparently, even Detlev started crying. And I'm like, why are you crying? You did all of this. And finally, after this very long trial after all of the testimonies from all of the children, Detlev decided to give in, and he actually made a confession to everything because he detailed the physical and sexual abuse that he had carried out over 20 years and about fathering 8 children with his adopted daughter. And so all that was left was the sentencing. But whilst Detlev was awaiting sentencing, a few more things happened. First of all, an investigation was opened into the authorities and all of their failures. However, whilst it was found that multiple people and multiple authorities had acted negligently, none of them had done anything criminally. So no prosecutions were brought against anybody. I don't even think anybody lost their job, like nothing. On top of all of this, another trial started for the creeps that the 2 girls were sold to. So we've got Ali, Mustafa, and Sevket. And eventually in the trial, all 3 men pled guilty. And guess what their sentence was? They were all sentenced to around 3 years in prison. 3 years for paying to abuse children. 3 years. Make it make sense, because that is not justice. This was in 2011, so they're already out. They have already served their sentence. It's crazy. But if that makes you angry, what I'm about to say is probably going to really boil your blood, because now it's Detlev's sentencing. So Detlev, he has abused pretty much every single family member for over 20 years, verbally, physically, sexually. He has sold his children for them to sexually abuse them. He fathered 8 children with one of his adopted daughters. Now, if you ask me, he should be sent to prison forever, never to be released ever again. And even that wouldn't be long enough. But this absolute monster of a man was only sentenced to 14 years. 14 years. He didn't even get a year for each year of abuse he carried out. Like literally, he should be serving 20 years minimum. But no, he was sentenced to 14 years. And the sentencing took place in March of 2011. So for any of you out there that have already quickly done the maths, that means that at the age of 62, Detlev is due to be released from prison later this year. I am just lost for words. How is that allowed to happen? This man is truly a monster, one of the worst people we have covered on this channel. And he is going to be released from prison at 62 later this year. No. I don't know if anything can be done to stop him from being released from prison. I don't know. He should never be allowed to walk the streets ever again. He should never know freedom again. And that is a really frustrating end to today's case, isn't it? I just really hope that all of the victims of today's case are doing okay. I mean, there are so many victims from today's case. I just hope that they have been able to recover and rebuild their lives and find peace and happiness. So that is it for today's case. As always, let me know your thoughts, theories, and opinions. And don't forget to leave me your case suggestions in the comments down below, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye.